My parents were farmers and lived near Eureka. My maiden name was King, or Koenig, Koenig in German, as my father's family was from Germany. And my mother's relatives farmed near Morton, close to Groveland, actually. And my maternal grandfather was Bishop Samuel Gerber. He was a Mennonite pastor and a national leader in the Mennonite Church, USA. He worked on reconciliation, especially in churches from New York to California, and farmed. They had a nice farm. And the Gerbers were originally from Alsace-Lorraine.
Okay. And do you happen to know if they came to Alsace-Lorraine in that stream out of Switzerland that went to Alsace-Lorraine and came here? They're mostly Mennonites and Apostolics and Amish.
I think they were in that group.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Then my dear husband Don farmed near Morton during his entire life, except when he served 2 years in the Army, of course. His great-grandfather was Daniel Roth, and he hailed from Alsace-Lorraine. Great-grandfather Daniel Roth came to America with his widowed mother when he was only 4 years old. And that was in 1837. So skipping a lot of time here, Daniel Roth purchased the Roth homestead February 6, 1865. And great-grandfather Daniel Roth, farmer and also a Mennonite pastor, passed on the Roth homestead to Don's grandfather, then to his uncle, and then to his father, and then finally to Don, and Don owns the Roth homestead. This year, the Roth name for that land is 153 years.
Wow. Okay. But before we get too far with it, again, I need to know when and where you were born.
Oh, when? Eureka, Methodist Hospital in Peoria, March 9th, 1935.
Now, I'm going to ask you a little different than I have some of the others, because you and Don were essentially the Morton historians. And so, curious, were they Mennonite or Apostolic?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So they would have been in front of, because as that group moved out of, you know the story, the religious persecution. So they fanned out, mostly to Alsace-Lorraine, but also into Bavaria and into Austria to some degree. So you're consistent with everything that we have found supports this idea. Okay. So but you already had in your book anyway.
Right.
So they came here. What do you think made Morton sort of the ending spot? I know there was a trail, and Herb talked about it a little bit, kind of a path they followed for the East Coast. They were stopping off points in Ohio and Indiana and here, but somehow everybody looked at Morton and said, this is where we want to be. What do you suppose accounts for that?
Well, when Don's great-grandfather and his widowed mother, Veronica, came to America, they were on the ocean for 42 days, and they came first to Butler, Ohio. The reason for that was she had a daughter that was married and lived there.
Yes.
And so then they migrated this way, thinking that central Illinois was a place for good farmland, and this is why they wanted to come to a place where there was good farmland. I want to talk a little bit about something else here to mention. It's a beautiful farmland area.
You go right ahead.
But Morton was a swamp, a quagmire.
Yes.
And this problem had to be overcome. So fortunately, Andrew Rapp and brothers came to America in 1875. And they too were farmers, and they too were masons from Germany. So in 1877, Andrew and Barthol Rapp built the tile factory in Morton, near where our Apostolic Christian Cemetery is today, actually. They produced many field tile, and so the swampy land could be drained well. Truthfully, our family bought some land north of Morton first, and then they sold that, and then they bought land where we have the homestead today because it was much blacker soil, very fertile, and the tile had made it wonderful for production. At this time, the population of Morton was 150 people, very small, actually. So this was phenomenal transformation when they came to Morton, and in the Morton News, 1905, it said, "The tile has made Morton one of the garden spots of the world."
Really? That's interesting.
So and then you asked, did they leave Morton? No, they didn't, because when you are farmers and your land is in one place, you're going to stay where that is. The Roth family was a big family, and some did move other areas, but most of them stayed in this area right here. Mm-hmm.
Are the Roths the largest farmers in the area, do you think?
I would say among the big farmers. There are others too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. But my sense has been that given the number of Roth families, probably have the most acreage.
Yes, there's a lot of acreage there.
Than anybody. But it was a curious set of circumstances in a way. So many people with common views and values, seized on Morton, which couldn't have had a very big existence prior to that because it wasn't settled. The township was, I think, 1850, yes? And most of those people were in that first wave of Anglo-Scots-Irish after the Revolutionary War.
Surely.
So here came all these other people that said, this is a great spot. And they created, my observation, they created a kind of a commonality, a set of values that has endured to this day. It's sort of what makes Morton Morton.
That's right.
And I think that comes from that nucleus of families that came here and the things they did. Would you agree with that?
Yes. And there are some very favorite things about Morton that I might share with you too. First of all, the Rapps not only supplied the field tile, they also started the Morton pottery December the 8th, 1922, and they created and produced beautiful fancy teapots, mixing bowls, bean pots, coffee pots, butter jars, baking casseroles, flour containers, all kinds of things like this. Their husbands would come for the field tile, and they wanted something for their wives. And so they decided, well, they're going to have a nice pottery and have all these beautiful pieces that the wives could enjoy and purchase, and that worked out great. And then, of course, early in history, too, can't miss Witzig's Apparel and Shoes, started by Theodore Witzig, a tailor from Zurich, Switzerland, in 1875. Clothes for everyone was exciting. The family kept the business. They remodeled in 1964. And then Ben Franklin had a busy business right downtown Morton, 1940 to 1987. Okay. And then popular restaurants were the Peppermill, the Blue Max, and the Redbud Tree in the past. And, of course, today we have Culver's, which is wonderful, and Steak and Shake, and Crackle Barrel, Pizza Ranch, Monocle's, and the seasonal Dairy Queen, and many others. Another favorite of Morton would be the beautiful parks, Idlewood Park, Birchwood Park, McClellan Park, Northwoods, and others. Swimming in Idlewood Park. And then our wonderful Morton Unit District 709 school system, outstanding. We have beautiful band, symphony, and choral concerts, as well as dramatic productions in the new attractive Bertha Frank Auditorium. And Morton's captivating sports was always important. Baseball started in 1894 in Morton, believe it or not. Football, basketball, soccer, volleyball, cross-country, track, and others. And then we are very fortunate to have the Blessed Sacrament School and the Bethel Lutheran School systems, which is nice to have in our town. The bicentennial was a very important celebration. Under the direction of my dear Don, it was very enthusiastically accepted. Some of the initial events were the community worship service in the Idlewood Park, July 6, 1975. Other events were the Illinois Wagon Train, the town meeting of 76, held at Morton Junior High, and then the 4th of July celebration, July 4th, 1976. Every area had to have a lasting project. For Morton, it was Freedom Hall. And Don worked with the Morton High School students. Every day for 2 years at noon, they would come to that area and they would work on construction of Freedom Hall, because we didn't have enough money to do it just with hiring somebody.
Right.
That way gave them experience and a love for the community, as well as we got the project. And then the bicentennial theme was Celebrate the Past and Create the Future. Okay, festival traditions have been exciting in Morton history. The oldest festivals on record are the Carnival Days on Main Street, started September 14th, 1904, way back. Later, the Morton Colt Shows and the Morton Livestock Shows were held in 1914 to 1920. Over 2,000 people attended the 1919 show. And later on, they had free entertainment called the Morton's Fall Festival and Hobby Show. And then, of course, in 1970, the Morton Pumpkin Festival, which was previously held in Eureka, my hometown,
Yes.
was initiated with thousands of people. So Morton not only is the city of beautiful homes, it's also the pumpkin center of the world because we produce more pumpkin here than anywhere else worldwide. And it's organized by the wonderful chamber. They do a beautiful job every year with that. Businesses that are still around, ones that exist in the past but are no longer here. Morton Pottery. I wish we had the Morton Pottery yet. Had so many beautiful pieces.
Everybody talks about Morton Pottery, and Bud just talked about it
Did he
fairly
really?
extensively. He talked about the dishware and the,
Yes.
and the
Oh, good. And a Witzigs. I wish we had Witzigs. It was so convenient, and it was top-notch quality. You know, a beautiful clothing store. The Conover Drug Store, I don't know if anybody's talked to you about that, but Dr. William Conover immigrated to the United States from England in 1851. In 1869, he founded the Conover Drug Store in conjunction with his medical practice. He performed dental work, he did embalming, as well as being a doctor and a pharmacist. And the Conover Drug Store had the first telephone in Morton. And they would get telephone calls, and then Grant, his 10-year-old boy, would hop on a horse and go tell the people that they have a phone call, they need to come down to the Conover Drug Store and call them back. And that's the way they got the messages around in town. Also, they had horse-drawn wagons, 6 of them actually, and it said Conover Drug Store on the side of the wagon, and they would go to different people in a 30-mile radius and take them medicine, drugs, whatever they might need. And so he owned it, and then his sons owned it, and then his grandson, Robert Conover, in 1941, got it. So this family played quite a vital role in the Morton community, too. Grimm Oil was first known as Home Oil. It was founded by William Grimm Sr. Home Oil began in 1918. They pumped gas by hand from a 50-gallon barrel. Later, the business was sold, and they added radios and appliances and TVs and all kinds of
Is
things.
that the one that was down by the railroad tracks?
Right across from Roth Green, kind of corner.
Yes.
All right. The Bayer implement was very important. Came in 1901 by a German, Michael Bayer. Arch Bartlemy in 1918 started a threshing run and also an equipment store. Interlocking Fence Company came in 1903. Co-founders were John Getz Sr., Joseph Howder, and Ben Howder. The Ottobaum family played such an important part in Morton with their brickwork and masonry work. They came from Germany in 1904. And another important business is Morton Buildings, sold by Interlocking in 1950. And since our family is part of the Roth Grain, I'd like to just talk a little bit about that. The first grain elevator was owned by William Moschel, Moshel.
Want me to hold that?
Sure, thank you. And Erastus Roberts in 1876. And later, Samuel Mosiman joined that partnership. The land was notable for the grain company. There was another company that wanted to get started. So Charles Campbell from the United States government purchased the land March 18th, 1837. He transferred the land to James Campbell, his son, who is so important because he made the first platform for Morton, the first plat.
Yes.
Later, that property went to William Campbell, and then he sold it to Jacob Mathis, July 22nd, 1889. And here the grain elevator, another grain elevator was built. The Mathis family sold it to Allied Mills in 1929. And in 1938, it was purchased by Chris Howder, became the Howder Grain and Coal Company. They also sold coal. And then January 2nd, 1965, the elevator was sold to Don, Herb, and Norm Roth, and is Roth Grain Company today. But that goes way back to 1876.
Wow.
So interesting to
It is interesting, and Moseman, whose name I'd not heard before, is the name of the man for whom the street is named, apparently.
Yes, exactly. So other businesses we wish that we had would be home-owned grocery stores. We used to have Martin's, we used to have Thompson's, we used to have Middleton's. When Don was mayor, he tried so hard to get some extra grocery stores in here, but it was not possible at that time. Also, we had such wonderful restaurants. We had Peppermill, the Red Bud Tree, the Blue Max, Ruby Tuesdays, and so forth. I wish that could be restored too. Okay, what are some of your favorite things about Morton, and why is Morton such a great place to live? I have to say one of the most important reasons of the success of Morton is the multiple churches here. It's definitely a Christian community. For example, the Morton Community Church began organized worship in 1842. That's a long time ago. Actually, the Methodists and the Congregationalists first met at the Lyceum Library at Evans Corner, which is north of Morton a bit, in the 1850s. And then in 1981-82, Morton Community Church celebrated its 150th anniversary, so it's quite an old church.
I remember visiting there,
Do you?
I think at the time, and somewhere, Ruth, if you look at a chart, I've seen it, that shows the development of the various faiths from all of these people that moved out of Switzerland. This church is also related to that
That's
outflow of people. So they're related also to the Amish, the Mennonites, and the Apostolic Christians.
Now, history of the Apostolic Christian Church is directly related to what you mentioned a little bit ago, the persecutions of German-speaking Christians in Central Europe in the 1830s. Brother Samuel Froelich of Switzerland introduced the church to America, Apostolic Christian. And in 1867, we had a small apostolic church erected on the corner of what is now Jefferson and 3rd Streets. In 1891, a large two-story building was built. And in 1957, a larger structure was built, increasing seating to 1,000. And of course, now it has been taken down, and they have built a new church outside the city here. The Mennonite Church had its origin in Switzerland. In January of 1525, there were a number of leaders, but one was Menno Simons, who started the Mennonite Church in Germantown, Pennsylvania. We hail from Pennsylvania first. And then the first group of Mennonites was organized by Bishop Andrew Ropp, who came from Alsace-Lorraine. And the Ropps, of course, are part of our church today as well. And they met in homes, and then they had some country churches. And then in 1941, we built the church on Chicago Street and outgrew it. And so in 1965, we dedicated First Mennonite Church that is on South Main. But as time went on, we had over 20 churches in Morton. And God has been so good. And I think this Christian influence has been so important to the development of Morton, and has drawn so many wonderful people, giving, generous people. We have a wonderful library. That's another favorite thing of Morton. First library going out to Evans Corner. Joseph Evans got 40 acres of land for $212. And he used it as a library, and the Methodists and the Congregationalists would take turns every other week. They would have church there.
Where was Evans Corner?
Evans Corner would be, you go out North Main, and few miles out of town. I could show you.
Okay, but it's just north of the current city limits.
Yes,
So,
exactly.
and 40 acres back in those days, you may know this, correct me if I'm wrong, but back in the days when after the Civil War, and particularly when they opened up land opportunities, they were in 40-acre lots because that was the size of ground that one man with a mule could farm. Does that sound right?
Probably.
I have read that.
That's probably. We had horses on our farms. Don had horses on his farms, but we had more horses than that, of course.
Herb talked a little bit about that, and I was surprised to hear from him that in the early days of mechanical tractors, that they still had heavier ground, and they still used horses because the horses could manage the plows and the heavy ground, and the tractors could not.
Better. That's
Yes.
right. Exactly. Right. Sometimes the newest is not always the best.
And Don and Herb grew up as farm boys behind the horses, and then later
yes.
with the tractor.
Yes, definitely.
Yeah.
Yes.
And you grew up on a farm.
Yes, my
Yeah.
father used horses when I was a little girl. On the farm, with the plow and everything that they did.
Did you ride?
Did I ride? Oh, I love riding horses. I did that so often. And we'd move our cattle, our Angus cattle, and from our farm to my grandfather's farm to my uncle's farm. We'd go right down the gravel road, and my father would ride one horse, and I'd ride another horse, and we'd have the collie dog, and those cattle would go right down the middle of the road. And then when that grass and that area was no longer good for feed, then we'd move to the next farm, to my grandfather's, then to my uncle's, and then back to my parents. Yes, I loved riding. Yes, I loved riding horses.
Okay, sorry, I interrupted you.
Oh, no, that's fine. That's fine. Let's see. Excellent Morton. Favorite things of Morton. Excellent Morton Unit District 709 schools. Between 1828 and 1831, Reverend William Brown began teaching grade school children and also held some Methodist services in his home in what is now the Oswald Park area. In 1873, a number of country schools were able to acquire tax support. I might mention, too, William Brown's granddaughter was Letty Brown. That's why that school is called Letty Brown.
Fascinating.
Yes.
And that also says that in the early days, schooling was much like colonial times. Kids were tutored at home. You found somebody who would be a teacher because you didn't have a common school, apparently, at that time.
Way back, right. But then they had school then and right in their home, and then later on, of course, building all of the schools around Morton. Morton High School was established in 1904. Favorite things of Morton: Libby McNeil and Libby, formerly Dickinson's Canning Factory, merged in April 1929. Favorite things: Caterpillar Worldwide Parts Distribution. Construction began March 11th, 1957. Other favorite things: we certainly have wonderful parks. We have wonderful swimming facilities. Morton Theater. Morton has beautiful roads, streets, sidewalks. People take such good care. The city takes such good care. It's such a beautiful city. Wonderful police and fire departments. The fire department was established in 1884. And at one time, we had 2 fire departments, and they would rush to see which group could get there first to put out the fire because they got a small amount of money for doing that. Interesting, isn't it?
Shortly after I moved here, the volunteer fire department participated in some kind of a contest. I can't remember where it was. Might have been somewhere in New York State. And actually won an award. They outdid the regular fire department. Do you remember that? Does that ring a bell?
Yes. Right. Yes. Interesting. Now we're fortunate to soon be the home of the new 9/11 regional call center. They're building onto the Morton Police building.
Yes.
The last couple of years when Don was mayor, they built the police building, and I think they thought that police department thought that this would last about 25 years. But now they are adding something new, so that's nice that they can do that, and that Morton has been chosen as the call center.
Well, they had the wisdom to provide the space for it.
Yes, exactly. Good banking facilities. Banking began in 1876. In January 1912, the Morton Bank was owned by Fred Ruling and W.H. Lackland. Became incorporated, and it was Morton State Bank. That was where Home Instead is today.
Yes.
If you look up high on the building, you can see the date. And then, of course, it was First National Bank, and then it was sold to other bigger corporations.
And that's Harriet McClellan's building.
Oh, is
Yes.
it? Okay.
And adjacent to that was the saloon that her grandfather owned.
Yes, right. Exactly. Good, safe water. We do not think about this, but it is so important. Morton's first water tower was built in 1893 at a cost of $4,000, and it was located on the corner of Jefferson and Plum Streets. Another favorite of Morton, the people of Morton have a strong Midwestern work ethic, and that's one reason why everything is kept up so well, and we're just have an excellent vision for the future, I think, here. Nice nursing home, Apostolic Christian Restmore. Good transportation. Morton's Electric Interurban was originated by William Brown McKinley. Literally, quote, lifted Morton right out of the mud, quote, according to Grant Conover. We had the swampy streets. It operated from 1907 through 1955, and it ran from Peoria to Bloomington to Champaign to Springfield and towns around. Cost 2 cents a mile.
Did it go south to St. Louis?
I think it did.
Bud talked about taking the interurban to Peoria and then down to see Cardinals games.
Yes. Later on it did. That's right.
And I was wrong. The bank building is not Harriet. She has where Home Instead is. Bank building's in the front, and she has Binkley. So the bank building is, I don't know who owns that, but I don't believe that's hers.
Okay. Well, the Rulings and the Lacklands owned it at one time. Mm-hmm. Okay.
May still.
Okay. And people, I think, in Morton have a wonderful desire for sharing Morton's historical past. That's wonderful. You know, you folks doing a great job with that in the chamber here. What would you like to see in Morton's future? Morton Historical Museum. Either an addition on to the library or a new building. We have so many artifacts and so many things that we need to preserve. And we are desperate, I think, for having a nice museum here in Morton. We want to save our heritage and pass it on to future generations. Other ideas for Morton's future, I don't know if it'll ever happen. Possibly a junior college, possibly a hospital, maybe even more underground utility wires to make it better. This is a community of rich generosity. People, as I said before, hardworking, ready to help. And in doing this, I want to mention the Mennonite Relief Sale because they have done so much for that too. This is the home of the Mennonite Relief Sale, with the funds going to 60 countries of the world and 20% of the net locally. Was founded, I should say, by my Don's Uncle John Roth. He was a lifetime resident of Morton and First Mennonite Church. He was a founder. He shared his vision with Don and his brother and some others. And as a result, the first Mennonite Relief Sale was held March 21, 1959, and that was in Congerville. And then it moved, because of huge crowds, to Peoria's Exposition Gardens in 1966. And the 25th sale, and the number after that, in 1983, the sale was in the large Peoria Civic Center to accommodate the huge crowds. And the last move has been to Interstate. The first sale made about $5,000, and now we're making net over $200,000. And this goes for relief. But what I want to emphasize, thanks you, Morton people, because we made anywhere from 1,500 to 1,800 strawberry cheesecakes each year and over 1,000 carrot cakes. And on the Friday before the relief sale, we'd have over 100 Morton people, not of our church. We had our church people too, over 100 Morton people that would come in and help us stem strawberries and make glaze and do things for this.
These are all volunteers.
They're all volunteers.
And
from
none
Morton
of
people.
these products are commercial, correct? They're all homemade.
Right. No, it was made in the church basement under the health department's scrutiny to make sure everything was fine. So thank you, Morton friends, for helping us for over 30 years doing this very important deed. So sincere thanks to God for allowing Don and me to be a part of the relief sale since 1959. We have worked hard for the sale and are humbly appreciative of the opportunity to do so, to help other people in such a fine community as Morton. And again, I want to applaud the Morton Chamber and the Morton Historical Committee for diligently working here, and finally say that we want to celebrate the past, but create a wonderful future under the direction of God and His help and the wonderful people of Morton. Thank you.
Well, thank you.
What do you,
The Roth family has basically made the Mennonite relief sale, because I can remember first reading about it when I got here. Of course, I didn't know anything about what it was, and as I came to be more involved in village affairs, really, every year you'd read the relief sale was coming up. Well, basically, what made that happen was the Roth family, and Herb told a little about that as well.
We tried.
And about his uncle coming to him, and so I remember the way Herb told it is he wasn't entirely convinced at first, and I think his uncle was a pretty good salesman with Herb
Yes.
and Don.
Uncle John Roth had read about this in Pennsylvania. The first relief sale was in Pennsylvania. And Don and Herb, were skeptical and, of course, very busy on the farm. But then, he was really sincere about this. So they said, okay, Uncle John, we'll try. And it was a success. And so then they tried it another year. And ever since then, it has continued.
It's a great story. And the huge benefit to the people who receive the
Oh, yes. Yes, Mennonite Central Committee is located in Akron, Pennsylvania, and they work in 60 countries of the world. And the money, all of us volunteer our time, and those people only, I think, about 15 cents of a dollar goes to administration. The rest all goes for relief, food, clothing, medicine, whatever. And when we give it to local agencies, like 25 or 30 agencies in this area, we give 20% of the net proceeds to them. That has to go for food for hungry people. So we try to make it really, helpful to those in need.
Ruth, when you were growing up, and just thinking about Eureka and Morton, and particularly Morton, who are some of the people that you think stood out that helped? You've named a few, but some of the people that stood out, they helped make Morton what it is. There were a hand, as I look back, as kind of an outsider looking back at it, a handful of people who were instrumental, and it had great vision and a terrific sense of ethics. Hardworking people.
I have to say that rather than naming people, I think it was the many church leaders, whether it was the Morton Apostolic or Morton Community Church or First Mennonite, so many people in the churches that were really dedicated to helping others. There's so many names, I would never be able to mention them all. But yes, really dedicated Christians that want to have a nice city and want to do a lot for other people.
Is there anything that we haven't talked about that we should have?
There's so many things. I've even just touched the surface here a little bit, but like I say, I think it's just important that we do celebrate the past, that we do try to get a museum established here, and that we definitely place our faith in God and look to Him for guidance for the future and create a wonderful future for our city.
Well, thank you very much
Yeah.
for your time.
Appreciate
We
it.
deeply appreciate it.
Thank you for including me. That's
Oh,
nice of you.
we could not have done it and not included you. You are the kind of the, if it hadn't been for what you've done, none of the rest of this would take place.
It's true.
So
It's true.
You're so kind.
It's true. It's foundational.
you mentioned Reverend Freely.
Yes.
You know that he was run out of his church and died in, I think he died and buried in Strasbourg.
Oh, did he? Okay.
Yes.
Was-
When we went over with the 2014 trip,
Okay.
Mike Witzig and I think Jeff Grimm was with us. We went to that church in Brugge, and we stood out, and there are all these old Morton names up, and people would say, because we had this,
Sure.
and years ago, people say, well, we're German. I said, well, it doesn't make any sense, all these German names, they're Swiss German, they must have come,
Sure.
because of the religious movement. And of course, it was as you know, the schism in the Reformation between you had the split with the Catholics, and then the
Right.
Protestants split.
Right.
In the level of cruelty was just astounding. I mean, you wouldn't expect. You sort of think of the Swiss as not,
Yes.
billion years of civilized behavior, and yet during that period, it was brutal. And I remember the reason it all struck a bell with me when I came here is because I had it in a history course in college somewhere. I can't remember why or what, but they streamed out of it. At some point, they said, "We've had enough," and they left and went into Alsace-Lorraine, then fanned out into the rest of the world, and they went in some in South America, but they just made almost a line across the Midwest, and then they kind of split and went down. There's a bunch in Texas, and some more went up, and some in Canada that are related, I think. So all of these people, but it all started with this fierce, and they actually fought a war. And a guy by the name of Zwingli, is that a name to you?
Yes.
Was killed, and he was a compatriot of John Calvin.
Yep.
And he was killed in battle.
Knox.
Yeah, and his lieutenant survived but capitulated to the Calvinists. And 'cause I used to go to Geneva regularly on business for Caterpillar, and I never got to the church, but the original Calvin Bible, I think, is on display there in that
John
church.
Calvin. Yeah.
The German language, the Calvinist.
Totally pravity,
Bible,
unconditional
was-
election, limited atonement,
Yeah.
irresistible grace, perseverance of the saints.
But the state supported it was the state supported religion apparently, plus whatever other radicals were around, and maybe whatever Catholics were left in French Switzerland, that made life so difficult for in some cases committed atrocities against the Anabaptists related believers, and there was this big outflow, and finally they looked at the United States and said, this is the place where we go. And then you hear the story of all these, you, Herb, everybody's Bud, everybody who's an old family here tells basically the same story, and they seem to come across to Pennsylvania, into Ohio, Indiana,
Ohio.
and then you got Doug Haybeger. It was a Swiss town in Indiana where he came from. His family at one time was Amish.
Oh, really?
So, yes.
Didn't know that.
So, incredible story in my mind.
Sure.
And here's little old Morton, and such a chunk of world history.
Yes, exactly.
Okay.